It's a great pleasure to be here and having a very important discussions in front of us. And I really like the title of the panel that we will, in the conference, In Solidarity We Rise, because we've heard a lot of anger, a lot of hatred, but out of all of this, I think we can learn together and we can rise together. And we hope this is what our conference day will achieve for us. And what our panel would like to do today, we are composed of 3 trustees of Asia Society. And as trustees and somewhat guardians of Asian well-being, we want to be able to explore today, what is the state of mind of our Asian community? What are they thinking? How deeply are they hurting? And what can we do to work together to achieve the positive that we can out of this difficult experience? And so I'm just delighted to be here today with Mohit and Sonny to explore the state of mind of the APA community. What are they thinking? What are we all concerned about? But most importantly, what are we hopeful about? And perhaps I'll turn to you, Sonny, first and get your thoughts.
Thank you very much, Lulu. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here today. And, look, this is I think the Asia Society, I'm sure when the Rockefeller family, founded it, they had a lot of things in mind for what they wanted it to help accomplish. I'm not sure that they ever thought helping put support for anti-Asian APA hate would be part of what was going to be on the agenda. Certainly not 60 years down the road, right? As we sit here in 2021, I think what I would say is that, I've been in the last, I try very hard to keep things apolitical, but it's hard for me. What I will say is in the last 4 or 5 years, I've been struck by a lot of what I've seen and heard in the United States very broadly and just thought, is this 2017, 18, 19, or is this 50 years before that? Mm-hmm. And I think a little bit of what we've got going on right now is a continued extension of that. That being said, as you said in your introductory comments, I'm an optimist. I'm an eternal optimist. I'm very hopeful. I'm a big believer that that most people, that overwhelming majority of people, are not only kind and open-minded and open-hearted, but also hate to see what they see going on around them right now. And whether that's hate towards Asians, whether that's hate towards the Black community or any other minority group or other underrepresented groups like the LGBTQ plus community, I personally believe that this is an aberration. I very much believe that all of us need to work together as allies, and I really believe the future is bright. But right now, and if I look backwards in the last 5 years, I look backwards in the last 5 months, it's very discouraging.
Mm-hmm. Right. Thank you so very much, Sonny. And Mohit, what perspective do you bring to this?
So I thanks, Lulu, and thanks to the Asia Society for including me here. I share Sonny's optimism and concerns. I will say that I think, that whether you live in New York City or whether you live in a small town somewhere else across the country, all the cities, towns, we're all sort of starting to get back to normal, whatever that might be. And I put that in inverted commas, post the sort of the brunt of the pandemic, which has been hard enough, I think, trying to get back to normal, whether it's going to the office, getting back to some sort of normalcy in your everyday life. But that has been compounded. The difficulty has been compounded, obviously, by the anti-Asian sentiment that we've seen over the last several weeks and months, and to Sonny's point, going back a few years now. So that has made it very tough for a lot of my friends, family, colleagues, as we all think about how we adjust to the new normal. And so that's been probably the toughest thing. The perspective I think I bring, amongst others, my place of work, we've spent a lot of time over the last few months trying to listen, I think, and then provide some support. And we can go into it in more detail, obviously, as I think you plan to. But I think being able to listen, share experiences, talk to each other, I think is sort of the first step to finding some healing. I think so. It makes you feel a little bit better to know that there are other people around you that have similar experiences, even though those experiences may not be positive, and in many cases really quite negative. But I think talking, sharing these experiences has been helpful for us, for me, and many of my colleagues. And so that's how I think about, as sort of the first path to maybe finding some perspective and aligning ourselves better to the broader community around us.
Right. I think what has been encouraging about the broader community is that we know there's a history in America, the melting pot of the world, that as new communities have come into the shores of U.S., they have always been persecuted. They've been given a hard time, and they persisted, and they eventually became part of the American fabric. And this is a history that we remember as all of us go through our periods of transitioning into the great American community. And I think what I've observed is that in solidarity we rise is very true, because in instances where I've heard about assaults on Asians in recent times, the most encouraging thing has been that when that's happened, others came to the assistance of the Asian. I have a friend who's an Indian American, and she was in a very chic Upper East Side gourmet store. She'd be standing in line doing her usual thing, never even thinking about racism. And she happened to just slightly jostle the gentleman in front of her. And he turned around and he glared at her and he said, "What are you doing here? You don't belong here." And he began to verbally assault her. And she's petite and he's very large. But the most important thing is that the people all around her on that line, they all surrounded her and they basically protected her from this large bully. And one of them went to get the manager. And I thought it was wonderful to see that. And I think the more we see of that, the more of a solidarity we do build with our fellow Americans. And I hope that you all have some stories you can share with us that give us both the tough reality, but also maybe some hope.
Sure. Yeah, look, I would say, we all have different backgrounds, right? And I think on a prior discussion that I did with Asian Society, they asked me about my background. My family came to the U.S. when I was 3 years old. Obviously, family's originally from India. And I grew up in Tennessee. Spent most of my formative years there. And let me just say this. Growing up in the South in the 70s and 80s, you see a lot, right? Saw a lot. But what's interesting is, and so look, I know what being, subjected to racism is all about. I know what that was like growing up. I knew what it was like starting on Wall Street in 1990 at a time where Wall Street was not very diverse at all, right? And the racism was different. People didn't start with the N word. It was different other ways. And yet, I've been blessed. I've had a great career. And I would say that, for what it's worth, most of the opportunities I've been given in my career have come from white men. And I say that because if you think about this in a professional context, right, we can sit here as people of Asian descent and feel like we're on our own. And yet I believe for every bully, honestly, Lulu, I believe there's 20 allies and supporters, right? And I think that, the story that you just told is, whether it's been what's happened in the last few months. I remember what happened a lot actually after September 11th. My family is Sikh, so a lot of my uncles wear turbans and other stuff. I had a couple of uncles who got beaten up pretty badly after 9/11, right? And in hindsight, it was completely understandable on one level why people were so angry after what had happened in this country. And yet it was ignorance in terms of where they were lashing out, in terms of where they were sending this anger and this energy that they had. And I really believe that what is going on right now, right, we could talk about a lot of stories, but I really believe that what I have seen is when people get an opportunity to get educated, or they get and educated is maybe a very big word, but if they just get the ability to get some perspective and they understand, that's where my optimism comes from. I think that, look, when you've got, we've all been living in this terrible pandemic for 15 months now. as we were talking about before the conference started about when normal comes back, right? I think normal is starting to come back. Mo looks very normal now, suit and tie, sitting in the office. I think that, but people are at their wits' end from a lot of different perspectives, right? No one is their best self right now, is my view. And so you've got this stuff going on. And then when you got, again, from a leadership perspective, prior leadership in this country calling the virus the Kung flu or the this or the that does not create an atmosphere of one where one might be hopeful. And yet here we sit today and we've got our first female, Black, and Asian vice president, right? Mm-hmm. Right. And so my view is, Lulu, the reason I'm hopeful is that you've got certainly lots of really negative data points and a lot of things that have happened. But I also just feel like we're going in the right direction. And I really do. And I really believe the Asian Society is well placed to help in that small E education or big E education.
Mm-hmm. Right. No, it's good to hear that. And Mohit, do you feel the same kind of optimism that Sonny feels?
I do. I definitely do, because I think this country and I think the broader Asian community has been through many things before on their way to this country, through lots of different events that this country has gone through. So yes, I think I'm long-term and medium-term very optimistic, but I do think we have to address some of the short-term, the near-term issues. And whether it's the example you gave about your friend in line at the store uptown in New York, I think we all have a lot of those stories. And I think what we've done, both in my place of work, but also in my community at large, is we've had a lot of sort of what we call listening sessions, where we get together, juniors, seniors, young, old, and we just talk about the issues we're facing. And we at Morgan Stanley, for example, about 2 months ago, we held a series of these discussions or sessions where we listened to what, in particular, some of our junior people are feeling. We're at a stage where people are starting to come back to the office, whether certain teams are back 10%, 20%, 30% on their way to something more normal. People want to come in, I think, now. I think a few months ago, most people, if you talk to them, said, I'd rather not come back to the office. Mm-hmm. I'd rather not really leave my house very much unless I have to, because obviously the pandemic was raging. But now, I think post the last couple of months where this country is on a much better footing with regards to the pandemic, we went from being one of the worst to one of the best globally. People want to get back to normal, whether it's going to the store every day, whether it's going to the office a couple of days a week. And so I think there's definitely some issues out there that include personal safety. We sort of, I work in Times Square. I feel safe right around my building, but I think if you walk 5 blocks or 3 blocks, stuff happens. And I think that's on the minds of a lot of our young and, not so young people as well. So personal safety is one big thing. Microaggressions, which you've talked about, is another issue. And then the third thing I think is just sort of mental stress. We're all dealing with so much stress right now on so many levels that I think those are the types of things that maybe we don't talk about as much or see quite as visibly. But when you start to talk to people, I think those types of responses, fragility, concerns start to come out. So I'm long-term very optimistic, but it's going to require a little bit of work in the short term for us to get back to feeling, better. And the recent sentiment, I think, has shown that that people are feeling stress. And the mental stress that I mentioned often comes from people who are giving the rage, giving sort of the anger, showing the anger. And so I think we have to think holistically about the people who are facing it and the people who are giving it, because there's really some issues on both sides there.
Right. And that's such important context, Mohit. We all know that this pandemic has taken its toll on people, not only physically, but emotionally. And there are a lot of people who are emotionally damaged by all this. And when you're at a loss for yourself, you tend to strike out at other people. And so I think we all know that many of the racist attacks have also come from people who are not well, and they're striking out. And often it's the older, more vulnerable that they attack. And so we have to keep that in mind. These are hate crimes, but there are a lot of different factors behind it. But even given that, I'm going back to something that Sonny said, something about our better selves. And it's always interesting because Americans are in some ways so bipolar. They're the most generous people in the world. They want to bring their democracy to the rest of the world. They want to teach American health and habits to the rest of the world. But at the same time, they've also been very difficult on newcomers to their shores. And how do we look at this complicated American psyche, because we live in this great country, and how do we tell ourselves and how do we tell other minorities, how do we bring out the best self in the American community? What do we have to do to bring out this best self? Is there anything we can do to bring out the very best of the American character?
Yeah, I can maybe start with that. I will tell you, over the last several weeks, as we saw, the George Floyd case resolved, or at least sort of come to some finality, as we saw the rise in anti-Asian sentiment, I think the best of ourselves started coming out, at least for me, from some of my Black colleagues, from some of my female colleagues, from some of my LGBTQ colleagues and friends, them reaching out to us, to the Asian community, and saying, we feel you. We hear it, we feel the pain you're feeling. They didn't have to say, hey, we've gone through it, because we all know that. But them reaching out to us, and I had some of my most senior Black colleagues, some of my most junior female colleagues, just to pick two ends of the spectrum, reach out and say, hey, how can I help? I'm with you. And that's sort of the best of ourselves, I feel. So to Sonny's earlier comment, a lot of his opportunities came from white men, right? That I think is a setup for many of us in this country and elsewhere. But I think seeing, and I mentioned these sort of listening sessions that we at Morgan Stanley conducted, and it was really used as a safe space for Asian Americans to talk with senior leaders in the firm. But if you watch some of those, we kept them deliberately small and had many of them. So maybe 20, 30, 40 on a Zoom. At some point, it gets a little too many people to sort of be heard. But if you looked at those Zoom sessions, half of the people in those Zooms were not Asian. And that was, I think, really telling that they were jumping on to hear, to listen, and to offer up their sort of allyship. And that's I think it answers your question, Lulu, around sort of showing the best of ourselves. And I think it happens to some degree naturally, because that's what this country is about. But it's really nice to see. And it really is, I think, important that we feel that others sort of are listening, hearing, sharing our pain, because actually you get to the other side, I think, much more in a much stronger position.
Absolutely.
I think I 100% agree with Mo. I'm actually a little bit embarrassed to say that before George Floyd was murdered almost a year ago, as a firm, we have 1,500 employees. We're not as big as Morgan Stanley, but we're not small. We had one, I would say, internal professional group, which was our Women Leadership Alliance, so our senior women and, whatever. And we didn't have anything actually for any of our other, unfortunately I have to use the term underrepresented groups, because in finance, just about everyone else is also underrepresented, right? And, we started first with a Black Professionals Alliance, which was, and then, we organized a group for our LGBTQ plus community. We basically just said, who would like us to help you? We want to help. And that came next. Then actually our Asian and Asian Pacific Islander committee, they came together. And what we did is we provided resources, we facilitated, but to most comment, and I participated in a lot of these, right? And there was at least half as many people involved that were not Black, that were not Asian, right? The allyship was huge. And it was honestly, to me, as a CEO, is super heartwarming to see that. Like, I just really, it was really encouraging. And actually, I really believe that allyship is super critical, right? I think that part of the reason I think Mo Is it okay if I call you Mo? I've known you for so long. That's how I know you. So, I can call you Mohit, but I feel like I'm probably you're being like your mom when I do that. So, but I worked at Morgan Stanley for a long time, so that's my background. But I would say that when different groups go through different things, I will tell you when everything was happening in our country last summer, right, when all the protests were going on, et cetera. If you looked at those protests, the minority of the group of people out there protesting were Black, right? The vast majority were everyone else. And that allyship was not forgotten, right? So Mo said his Black professionals didn't have to say to him, "We feel your pain," because it was understood. But when something happens going forward, right? And now, unfortunately, in the last few months, it's been our community that's been feeling it. It's not surprising to me that all these other groups are stepping forward to show support for us because we were there for them, right? And that's how this works in my mind. That is the way this all works. Look, I will say this, and look, I've been brainwashed since I was a little kid about how great America is for my father, mother who sacrificed everything to get here. I still believe that. I really do still believe. Look, every immigrant community that comes to this country has to deal with this, right? And the Irish dealt with it, the Italians dealt with this, and so that doesn't make it right? But this country, in my mind, is still as welcoming, if not more welcoming, than any other country I'm aware of in the world. And is one, again, I won't repeat my statement about Vice President Harris, but it's one of the few where you see the level of diversity. And it needs to get better, but the level of diversity we see in government, the level of diversity we see in business, the level of diversity we see in different places, I think we're a lot better off than a lot of places. That doesn't take us off the hook on what we've been dealing with now. I really believe that what we're dealing with now has been a culture of hate, which was it was always there under the surface. But it kind of got, I grew up, I've said before, growing up in Tennessee, I remember on Sundays when the Klan would march, right? They would march. It was almost like they went to church, and then after church, they put their hoods on and they'd march down the middle of the street and they'd have their little parade and whatever else. Okay, that was pretty bad. To me, it's even worse when they take their hoods off and they get their tiki torches out and put their khakis on and march around Charlottesville. That's worse, right? Because they're not ashamed to hide their face. You have an environment that gets created like that, right? Where people feel it is okay to lash out and to project this hate. That's bad, right? And so what we're dealing with is the effect of that, right? This is the hate against the Asian community is not the cause. It is the effect of all of that. I'm hopeful, though, that because we are now, I feel, moving away from where we have been in the last 4 or 5 years, that I'm just more hopeful. And I also believe that all of us has got to come together, right? If it's just the Asian community on its own, or the Black community on its own, or the Hispanic community on its own, et cetera, they're pretty strong groups. We're going to do better if we're together, right? And I think that allyship is really important. But by the way, whether it was a protest that happened last July, or whether it's the people that have come forward to say, and our internal affinity groups or whatever else, it's actually been the majority of almost every one of these groups that has come together in allyship have been white Americans. And that is very heartening to me, right?
Right.
Very heartening.
I think this allyship is a very important issue. And also, I think at the same time, we finally debunked the model minority myth, which I think has existed for many years to characterize Asians as stoic. They will take abuse, but they'll carry on and they'll be good citizens. And in some ways, other minorities resented the Asian model because we were sort of co-opted with the majority, and we kind of disappeared into the majority without protesting. But I think the pain this time, the howl of pain, and the very public admission that this really hurts us. And when you hurt our grandmothers and you hurt our children, we will not stand for it. And this is a very different response by the Asian community than in the past.
Yeah.
And it not only has it gotten the attention of the law and order and police guys, but more importantly, it's gotten the attention of other minorities who look at us very differently now. And I think instead of being stoic and not showing any pain, by showing that we're human, that we can hurt and we care and we want to be respected, we now have a solidarity with all the other minorities who've been hurt and persecuted. And that really builds a strong sense of community with others who've come before us and always thought, what was wrong with these Asians? They just don't seem to feel anything. But now we do. And I think it's a wonderful sense of community. I know in some of the institutions I'm involved with, there are a number of other Black American leaders whom I've known. We've always been in meetings together and so forth. But I think when Black Lives Matter and George Floyd brought the Black people to the streets, and there were as many whites and Chinese and Asians with them, they also began to feel that they were not alone in this. And when the attacks on the Asians began, some of my colleagues who were African American, they really came up to me, Lulu, are you okay? And how can we help? There was a genuine sense of, we feel your pain. It wasn't just trying to be politically correct, but truly a sense of kinship. And I think this really makes a difference going forward. And I think if other minorities come together, we will, through solidarity, be able to work with the majority to make the whole a better place. I think we need to see how we, as individuals, can continue to keep this momentum going. I think part of it is really being able to be open. I guess I was always raised to be rather stoic. You never complain. If you hurt, you never complain. If you're sick, you go to school and you carry on. But I think maybe we have to show a little bit that we bleed too. And I think that puts us in with the rest of the human race. We all bleed and we all need to look after each other.
Lulu, I think our community has, and I can't speak for everyone, but it sounds like you and I had similar experiences. I was told growing up to assimilate, right? That was what was most important, right? And I think that's fine. Look, I think I'm not the type of person who spends a lot of time looking backwards, but I think maybe because we had the opportunity maybe to assimilate a little bit, all right? The problem with that, if you go too far that direction, is you're caught flat-footed when all of a sudden you're then outcast as someone different, right? Because the purpose of assimilation is to kind of tuck into the fold of the herd, right? And then all of a sudden the herd isolates you because you're different, because the color of your skin is different, or the way you look is different, or your background is different. And that's why I think there's got to be a good balance, right? I think that's why I think the positive part of America being a melting pot is it is one of the few places in the world where you can still be you, but also be part of a collective whole, right? And so, but that's why I really also believe that it is really critically important I'll speak for myself, right? And it's probably for someone who was told his entire life to assimilate to get ahead. It's part of the reason I've become so vocal in the last year or two. And I'm a little bit honestly embarrassed I didn't get more vocal before that, but it's okay. I guess it's never too late. Because I think it is critically important, right? And there will be new generations of people that are going to come to this country, right? At some point, our community will at some point be like the Italians and like the Irish who are persecuted, and then all of a sudden now, folded in, et cetera. Hopefully we will never be the persecutors. But there will be new people that keep coming to this country, and we need to be a place that continues to attract, but also retain the best and the brightest. That is the strength of this country, and the diversity of that is the strength of this country. And that's why I think we got to come down hard on this, right? I agree with you. I think that you see the stuff that you see on TV and closed caption, and you see that someone's and then unfortunately, of course, they're attacking the more vulnerable. We got to come down hard on this stuff. We have to. The allyship's important. Putting our arms around each other is important. But from a law enforcement perspective, we have to come down hard on this. From an education perspective, we have to provide opportunities for people to get educated, to understand we're actually on the same side. Politically, we got to come down hard on this. I think it's really, really important. We need to hear it loud and clear from the leadership of this country, from both sides of the aisle, that this is not okay.
Right.
It is not okay.
Right. I think the only thing I would add, again, my background, I think, was slightly different from both of yours. I actually grew up in Hong Kong until the age of 18, and then I moved to the U.S. for college and stayed for the most part. was back to Asia for a little bit. But growing up in Hong Kong, I was a minority in a different way. But I never really felt it all that much, to be honest. You go to one of the international schools, and the people around you are actually very diverse. It was sort of 30% Hong Kong Chinese and 70% a little bit of everything: American, Australian, European, other Asian, and so forth. And so, yes, there was sort of little bits of racism, I think, growing up in any community, but I didn't quite maybe feel it growing up as much. And then you come to this country where the opportunities are tenfold, but there are some growing pains and issues. And it sort of feels like it's attacked different communities over the years. And maybe this is, we're at a point now where thankfully most people in a position of power, whether it's at the government level, at the city level, in companies we work at, in sort of community spaces, I think their voices are fairly consistent, or at least getting there, around no tolerance for racism. And a lot of it, I think, our Black colleagues have had to bear the brunt of for so many years. And so it almost feels like they've had to deal with it for decades. Now we're dealing with it. Of course, we've dealt with it for many years as well, in smaller amounts. Undertones, as Sonny said, I think, versus more overt racism. But now that it's coming out and becoming a little bit more overt for many of us, I think the solidarity that we all have to show with people of color and white people as well, people sort of all sort of generations and ethnicities, I think will probably get us to the right place, because it does feel like we're maybe not at an inflection point. I hate using that word because it feels very sort of definite, but I do feel we are finding ourselves at a crossroads of making some pretty important decisions around all of us as part of different communities. And I'm actually quite hopeful about that point.
Right. And to continue that momentum, I think there's one other perspective from the Asian side that I might want to throw in. Sonny, you talked about you always thought it was best to assimilate. Another characteristic of the Asian mindset is to hold yourself above the fray. And I think in some ways, many people have thought the Asians were arrogant and therefore not interested in assimilating and becoming part of the community. And I think I've seen that, at least in my own upbringing, when we first came to America. My mother always said, "Don't forget you're Chinese." And that was the implication, is that we're superior. And so if things don't go right for you because other people are too stupid to understand, you're the superior person. So feel proud of that, and that will take you out of the sense of being lesser than others. And I think that is that's a mantra I hear from Asian parents to their kids, whether it's because they're less economically advanced than some of their friends or not socially accepted, but they hold themselves above the fray. They don't engage. And I think that is anathema to any group that does not engage. Only by engaging, by contributing to the greater whole, do you then get accepted. And I think that if you look at the history of all the different immigrant classes have come, every group had to go through the ritual by fire, but they engaged and they became great athletes, great artists, great architects. And the Asians have so much to give, and we have given so much, but we have to continue to be visible and to be engaged in our communities. And I think that is what we as individuals really have an obligation to our own Asian community and to the greater community. But it's fun to talk about our own stories, and we could go on for many hours, but I do think our audience is enjoying hearing stories that resonate with them. But let's think about what organizations, and in particular Asian society, what can Asian society do in this time of stress that can help to encourage more tolerance, more inclusion? Asian society is well respected, has a lot of influence. What do you think, as trustees of Asian society, we should be proposing for our institution?
Well, look, I think education, number one, is probably first and foremost the most important. I think we have so many different things that we do as an organization from an outreach perspective, and I think it's a very powerful platform to be able to do that. I think also just bringing people together of different backgrounds and having them discuss this, right? Discuss the issues and discuss how we're actually in the same boat. So bringing people together from the Black community and from, other minority communities, together with obviously people from the Asian community, but very importantly, together with people from the white community, right? To discuss how we're so much more similar than we are different, and really just look. I think some of this, I really do believe, 90% of hate comes from ignorance or from a lack of understanding. And I don't think anyone's born a racist. I don't think that any child is born anywhere in the world is a racist. It is definitely what they are exposed to and what they learn over time. And the only silver lining to that is they can also learn differently. So I think education and shining a bright light on things is something that the Asian Society can do. It's done it on a lot of different issues over time. And I think we're very uniquely positioned for this. We really are. And especially given that we're here in New York, it's a very high profile place to be, at least for those of us that are in New York.
Absolutely. Right. Mo?
I 100% agree. I think the education for sure. I think actually the Asian Society is doing a lot of it already. The issue is, I think, or I'm not sure if it's an issue, but I think there are so many different forums out there right now, whether it's through social media, through the press, through organizations that we're all members of. I think everybody on the line today is a member of so many different organizations. It's easy to drown out amongst all the different organizations out there. But I think the Asian Society has proven to be a leading sort of source and indicator of a lot that surrounds the Asian community at large in the U.S. And I think getting our voice even louder at a time like this, this symposium is clearly the first step. But I would say, and I think we talked about this earlier before the symposium started, but the symposium has to be the first of many steps, right? I think we can't just have the 2 days and then stop. And I don't think we plan to. I think our plan is to just continue to get our voice out there to talk about different issues. I think what the Asian Society does, if I can sort of give almost a commercial for it, is whether it's Chinese New Year or Diwali or some of the big cultural times of the year for many of our community members, we're out there. And we have these fantastic social events, educational events, cultural events to educate people. And so I think we have to continue to do that. But in particular, after the symposium is over, I think we have to continue to get our voice out there because it is a great voice, but it can easily get drowned out amongst all the different things that we're all in the middle of as well.
Right. And I think Asian Society, with its three legs of business policy, education, and culture, is well equipped to bring the two different cultures together, at least of white America and then Asian contributions in culture and science, technology, business. And I think the cultural leg is a very important one too, because you can always disagree on trade and business when there are big stakes at issue. But culture doesn't really change much. People always love to try new foods. People always love to eat each other's foods. And I think they all saw that if you're breaking bread together, you're not going to be breaking heads together. And that's really true. I think I was telling Tom Nagorski about our program, and I was saying so many of our supporters are saying, you haven't been doing any good programs on food lately. And food brings the old, the young, the white, the yellow, the black, the brown, all together. Everyone loves to try good food together. So there's so many ways in which we have a richness of culture represented throughout our Asian community, and that New Yorkers would love to come and try, and people who've never been to Asia would like to try it. And it does bring us much closer to those who may fear us or may not know what we're all about. But food is a very good way, and art as well. Currently, we have the Triennial 2 in the Asia Society building, and it's really the only triennial specializing in contemporary Asian art. And many people who've been to, and this sounds like an advertisement, so I'll do my share, but I think when you look at the art of a people, you can't help but feel something good came out of this, something either painful or good, but these are human beings who created this stuff. And if it touches me, I should know something about these people who created it. So I think we're very fortunate. We do have both culture and education, which is so important, to supplement the very powerful work we do in the policy side. And I think we will do it. And I think to your point about Chinese New Year, it's important to bring the young people on board early on. I think young people, as Sonny was saying, people are not born intolerant. They're taught intolerance. And they can also be taught to be open-minded and to be welcoming of different perspectives. So I think this is a very important thing that Asia Society does. And I think under Kevin's leadership, we're looking at a number of new initiatives that we can bring in. He's just initiated the Asian film series, which brings great Asian filmmakers to the broader American public in a way that hasn't been done before. So in any way in which we can showcase what Asians can do, it tells the world not what we're good at, but what we're all about. And I think when you know what a people is all about, it's hard to hate them. So I think we can continue to do more of that. I think as we, and as an institution, we did a great job during the early days of the pandemic in New York, when we were bringing millions of dollars of the PPEs. When people were hurting, and it didn't matter what race you are, we made a point of getting the protection masks and ventilators to every hospital that needed it. And it really showed that helping each other can cross all racial lines. And many of the Black communities that received the materials, they were very grateful. I'm part of another group called the Committee of 100. And during the course of the pandemic, we also raised millions of dollars and shipped over equipment. And we made a point of targeting Black communities, Hispanic communities, and the deliveries were made by the Asians. And they went, and there are many pictures taken of the hospital staff in these regional communities, really thanking the Asians who were bringing it. And it was a heartwarming example of how it doesn't really matter what race you are. When human beings are at stake, you all help each other. And it kind of brings me to talk about the current crisis in India. We're all stricken by seeing what's going on there. And many of us are very familiar with India, probably you two more than I. What do you think Asia Society can do, or others in America can do, to help ease some of the crisis there?
Yeah, I can maybe start. Look, I think it doesn't need to be said, but it's obviously a humanitarian crisis that we haven't seen in a very, very long time. I think a lot is being done by the broader U.S. community. Mm-hmm. Again, I think every organization, whether it's my place of work or even social organizations that I'm a member of, they've all asked for aid, contributions. I think we all have friends and family, and unfortunately, in India, that are suffering right now. But I think the U.S. community has come together very well, actually, more than I think many other countries have. I know a lot of countries are sending aid, but I think what we have to continue to do, as I said this before, is not make it a one-time contribution. If it's a financial contribution or something else that you can give in lieu of money, don't do it once. I think we have to continue to give as much as we can for this foreseeable future, because it's not a sort of one and done type of a, you can help a little bit and go away, because I think this is going to be a while. It's going to take a while for India to turn the corner, just like worse, obviously, than where the U.S. was. But I think about where the U.S. was 6 months ago, mm-hmm. Where other countries like Brazil are today. But clearly India, with its population of 1.2, 1.3 billion, and I may be off by 100 million there, is going through a real crisis right now. So I think that this country and Asia Society, we've obviously been sending out notices, but other organizations that we're all a member of have been pretty vocal about sending as much help, whether it's financial or other. It's not just about financial aid. I think it's other sort of support that we can give, and it's got to be ongoing until we can get past this crisis. I don't know, Sonny, if you would add anything there.
Mhm.
Yeah, look, well, India thought it, at the beginning of the year, India thought it had dodged this bullet pretty well, right? And I think that the issue is that, the enemy here is not each other. The enemy is a virus that is very, very contagious, deadlier than some people probably want to admit. And the good news is we do have I'll use the word cure, but we've got a vaccine, which certainly helps. But this just shows you we're not going to be out of this as a world until we're all out of this. And right, so to most we all remember what New York City felt like 12 months ago, right? What March, April, May of last year was like, right? And I think we feel much better today. And at that time, there are other parts of the world that were looking at us and feeling bad for us and trying to do what they could to help us. And now we're in a better position right now, but now we see what's going on in India. But honestly, I always tell our team and I tell people I interact with, I feel great about, relatively speaking, where we are in the U.S. We're not going to get through this, any one of us, until we're all through this. Right? Mm-hmm. Today it's India. Who knows where it's going to be tomorrow? It's very simple. We need to get, we need to get vaccines. People need to get vaccinated. 2% of the Indian population has been vaccinated, right? It's just, and it's 1.4 billion now, Mo, so it keeps growing. So, it's a massive undertaking, but, we got to try to help do what we can do in the short term, help India, but really the midterm objective is we have to get people vaccinated there, right? And by the way, it's spreading through Southeast Asia right now because this is an airborne virus and you can't contain it, right? And it's just, I just think that, we just need to understand that I know people are incredibly empathetic. I've had a lot of people reach out to me. I'm sure Mo has as well about what can we do to help and all that. And I'm like, this is great. Here's some things you can do. Here's some organizations that are doing some great stuff. But the other thing you can do is be very vigilant but for the grace of God, this could be us right now.
Right. Is there any fear of the vaccine among the populace in India? We know that we're making very good progress in the U.S., but there's still a stubborn segment of the population that just will refuse to take the vaccine. And until we can get them on board, none of us are truly safe. And so we need to have that same kind of coming together in every other country. And then together the world is going to be vaccinated. In India, are there any other obstacles to overcome aside from just having adequate vaccines and equipment?
I'm not aware of a broader concern from people from the standpoint of not wanting to take like we've seen in some corners here in the U.S. I think their issues, they just aren't there. I mean, honestly, India had vaccines and thought they were through this, so they started actually shipping vaccines out.
I know.
At the end of last year, beginning of this year. And so I think I think that's the bigger issue right now. If they don't have that, and also the mechanism. You look at, we can all probably tell stories about how efficient our process has been here in the U.S. about getting vaccinated. I got vaccinated by the National Guard at a baseball stadium, and it was like military precision. And I will tell you, I'm still in India. Well, I used to be in India 2 or 3 times a year, still now for business. India is not set up for that. And so the challenges are really significant.
Right. I think India is also a wake-up call that there are other parts of the world where there was some sense of, we've made it through. And I know we had earlier not had much of an incidence in Africa. In Africa and India, we're actually the two surprises because there's dense population, less than ideal hygiene, and yet the incidence was very low. And then all of a sudden it exploded in India. And I think we're seeing early signs of that in Africa too. And there's another country out there waiting for that to happen. And I think the world community has to come together and say, we've got to be ahead of the curve now. India's already cat's out of the bag, but where else in the world could we have a ticking time bomb? And I'm not close to what HWO is saying these days, but I do think we've got to be thinking ahead of the crises before it hits. are any of you aware of what's going on in terms of India now in sort of thinking back to how we could have spotted this earlier or reacted earlier rather than waiting for the new variants to come and strike such a strong blow?
I think, look, I think it's complacency. Like, Mo mentioned, we saw it last summer in the U.S., late summer into this fall, right? People thought we were through this, and then we saw a significant new wave of complacency, right? So, look, this has been an issue globally. It's not just an issue in the U.S., but the fact that this has become a political issue to wear a mask, right? I just think that's the thing. That is the challenge, right? In terms of trying to get through this, not getting complacent. And for now, the only real solution we have is getting people vaccinated. And until people can get vaccinated, they have to remain vigilant. That is a lesson that we have learned in India that has not happened, right? So until we can get people vaccinated, they need oxygen. They need, and by the way, I get asked a lot about different organizations. I will tell you the Red Cross has set up something very specifically for India. And unfortunately, I will say I'm Indian, so I can say this. There are a lot of organizations you're not really sure where the money is going to go to when you give it to them in a place like India. With the Red Cross, the money is going to go to the right place. So that's where we've been doing a lot of our corporate giving. And so I just think, I think it's a prophylactic for the short term to try to get people through this. And then they got to get vaccinated. My view is for the rest of the world and other places that have the same challenges as India, we got to get the vaccines out there. Again, we just spend a little bit of time talking about how, we as Asians historically in the U.S. have felt we were a little bit above the fray, right? I think for us as a country now, the U.S. to believe we are above the fray, I think we're being short-sighted because, look, the Asian society is a great indication of this. And I know some people, so there are parts of political corners that don't like globalization. That cat's out of the bag. We are one big world now, and that's not going to change. But this world is not going to return to normal until everyone is back to normal, right?
Absolutely.
So, can't just be us, right? So that's why I think we got to be all over this with the same amount of vigilance as we were for ourselves as a country. Absolutely.
And those of us who went through the worst of it back in March, I think when you walk through New York City, it's amazing how people continue. It's 99% masked. And even when the CDC said we could take off masks when we're outside, the New Yorkers still kept their masks on, because when you have started an experience with such dire consequences and you've seen people dying around you, it leaves an impression and you get it. And I think we have to make sure that for those of us who get it can relay that same sense of constructive fear to everyone else in the world, so that countries that feel that either they're complacent or they just, for political reasons, don't want to adhere to it, they have to have that healthy sense of fear, because it is the only way to keep them honest.
Lulu, we definitely need it for the other part of the world. I split my time between New York and Florida. I will tell you, Florida needs that healthy fear sometimes too.
Absolutely, right.
You can go down there at all, spend any time there. They need the healthy fear as well.
But they're lucky in that most of their misbehaving was outdoors. And now we've heard from the CDC that it's a very, very low incidence of ever catching COVID outdoors. So I think that was their saving grace. But in areas of great density, witness some of the less developed countries, it's a time bomb. So we have to be really aware of that.
And I know that New York is not. I know this symposium is not just about New York, but obviously many on the Zoom today are New Yorkers, and it sort of shows how resilient New York City is, right? Because we went through our challenges, as we've all said, for 12, 14 months now. And even as we're coming out of it and the vaccination rates are high, people still wearing masks, I think, until they feel really comfortable. So going back to your point about India or other parts of the world, I think every culture, every country's had a slightly different way about thinking about it. Growing up in Hong Kong for the last couple of decades, whenever there is a slight incidence of an avian flu or something, everyone wears masks. So it's almost
absolutely.
Whereas other parts of the world, including the U.S., in particular the U.S., people have never worn a mask before. And so I think we're all sort of learning and adapting to challenges not just behind us, but ahead of us as well.
And everyone learned that this winter was the one winter no one caught a flu, because when you're wearing the mask, it's not good for the cold syrup companies, but we've learned masks have a benefit. So this has been great fun. I wish we had more time. I'm getting the high sign that we're out of time, but it's been wonderful talking to you, Sonny. And I think we've put a human face on some of the issues that we've talked about. And I know that the old saw that people don't always remember what they read or what they're told, but they always remember how they feel. And I think, I hope our audience today felt that we shared with them some of the ability to feel pain and the ability to care, and that we all belong to one community as a whole. And that will make us all a better country and nation, world. So thank you so much for your time.